Story 1. While working at a bank in Toronto, we were interviewing a contract firm from Montreal. The two parties began to speak negatively about us in French. My boss, knowing I spoke the language, subtly kicked me under the table and shook his head. After allowing the potential firm's employees to reveal their true intentions, I informed them that the meeting was over and wished them a safe trip home in perfect Montreal French. Goodbye. Story 2. End of a taxi ride in the Middle East. The driver called over a passerby to translate Arabic to English for me. They were talking over me, so I could hear everything they were saying. In Arabic, the driver said the journey cost 10. The passerby instantly translated this into English as 20. I retorted in Arabic that he said it was 10. They both pulled back a little, laughed, and accepted 10. I am guessing there were parts that I didn't understand where they both agreed to raise the price. Story 3. I was speaking when I didn't expect to. I worked in security at an airport, and a staff member asked me about a random passenger's flight time. The passenger was walking wobbly, and I commented to my coworker that he appeared intoxicated, assuming that with his non-local passport, he didn't speak our language. The person then responded in my language, explaining that he was not drunk but handicapped, and acknowledged that it could seem suspicious. I apologized and never assumed someone didn't speak my language again. Story 4. The Amish speak Pennsylvania Dutch, a form of Low German that even some Germans cannot understand. They have good reason to believe outsiders cannot understand them. A high school friend was leaving a restaurant when two Amish girls were sitting on the front steps. One said, "That one has a nice physique." He thanked her in Pennsylvania Dutch, leading to red faces and giggles all around. At work, I was cleaning a machine and making a mess when an Amish farmer watching commented, "Does this person know what he's doing?" I replied, "Yes, I do." To his credit, I received a formal apology. Multiracial adoptions happen among the Amish. Sadly, latent racism usually means that the adoptees have to leave the Amish community to find a life partner. Having grown up in that culture and faith, they are Amish on the inside but cannot make a life in the faith because they are the wrong color on the outside. I know one such individual, a black man now in his 30s, 6 feet 2 inches, built like a linebacker and no longer Amish. He was visiting his family in Pinecraft, an Amish settlement in Sarasota, Florida, when he saw two elderly Amish women coming toward him on the sidewalk. "Watch out for that big black man. He will run you off the path," one said to the other in Pennsylvania Dutch. He replied in Pennsylvania Dutch, "With our tongue we speak bad words against men who are made like God." From the Bible, James 3 verse 9. He then stepped politely aside so they could pass. I heard this story from both sides, from him soon after it happened and through the Amish grapevine in Ohio a year later. I like to think it had a lasting effect on Amish behavior. Story 5. I used to work in close quarters with a man who was newly married to his French wife. He would take phone calls from her, and with nowhere to go, I tried to politely tune it out since we were not allowed to wear headphones for safety reasons. I overheard some very sweet conversations. Hearing him tell her how much he missed and loved her was heartwarming. I never mentioned it to him or anyone else. It's not my place. Story 6. A group of young female tourists on public transport were pressed up against me in a crowded situation, and one of them said in Swedish, "Look at that person with his jacket above his head." The person was me. I responded to her in Swedish, explaining that I had a university project wrapped in my jacket and I was trying to protect it from the crowd. I even unwrapped it slightly to show her. But by then, she was looking down, embarrassed, while her friends were giggling. Story 7. I trained to be a Japanese translator and interpreter, but I don't have any Asian heritage, so no one would ever know unless I told them. At one point in my career, I worked at a company with many Japanese colleagues and was on a call with them and some non-Japanese speaking employees. After some heated discussion, the Japanese colleagues asked if they could switch to Japanese to communicate internally. The first thing they said was, "Why don't these Americans ever listen? They are so difficult to work with." I had to mute myself to laugh about it. I signed off the call in Japanese just to make them a little nervous. Story 8. A pretty girl at a college house party told her friend that she thought I was cute and planned to make a move that very evening. Surely, I should have capitalized on that valuable information, but I didn't because I acted foolishly and blocked my own opportunity. Story 9. When I went on a college trip to Japan, we were in the customs line at the airport when an elderly Japanese woman behind us started making snide comments about us as foreigners. Most people in my group spoke either very basic Japanese or none at all. I wasn't fluent, but I knew enough to understand that she was being disrespectful. I turned around and told her in Japanese that I had been excited for the trip because I had heard Japanese people were kind. The look on her face was priceless. Story 10. I taught English in local high schools in Indonesia for a few years. I used to pretend not to understand Indonesian so my students would be forced to rely on their English to communicate with me. One morning, during roll call, a student was missing. I kept asking in English if anyone knew where he was, and they all kept saying no. One of his friends asked his group in Indonesian if they knew. One of the boys replied, "He's taking a break." And I burst out laughing and revealed my understanding. The student who said it was mortified to have sworn in front of a teacher who knew what he was saying. Story 11. A long time ago, a friend was stopped by the German police. They refused to use English with him, knowing he didn't speak German. It must have been an act of fate that empowered them because as soon as his partner spoke in German, they were fluent in English. Story 12. I was checking into a 90,000 Tanzanian shilling room in a hotel in Tanzania a few days ago when the manager instructed the receptionist in Swahili to charge me 120,000 Tanzanian shillings. I interrupted her, challenged her in Swahili, and stated that the room was 90,000 Tanzanian shillings. She quickly stepped back and told the receptionist to charge the lower amount. That felt quite satisfying. Story 13. I wasn't working, but in college, I attended a French institution and we were in an English course focused on aircraft structures. The instructors right in front of us would say we were doing things wrong or that they thought someone didn't get the point, but they would never actually correct us or say anything. One day, I finally replied back in French, "So tell him." The two instructors were absolutely shocked and asked in French, "You understand us?" I can't tell you how often I've overheard French speakers talking negatively right in front of the person or people, assuming we don't understand. In Canada, it is quite common to learn both languages, so I don't understand why they would do it so blatantly and then act shocked every time someone understands. Story 14. When I was a research student, I taught basic information technology to undergraduates. The university where I studied had many Greek students. My research partner was Greek and taught me various Greek insults. While teaching a group of Greek undergraduates, they called me names, but I did not acknowledge it. Eventually, I won them over, and by the end, they were more accepting. On the last day of teaching, I thanked them all for their participation and hard work, speaking in Greek, which resulted in many red faces. Story 15. I'm a white man who speaks Mandarin and lived in China for a decade. I have heard it all, not just in meetings but on the street, in restaurants, on the subway, everywhere. I am often labeled as a foreigner. Some people have referred to me derogatorily. I couldn't have possibly completed that task because I am seen as an outsider. I have been subjected to unwanted advances. There are comments about my appearance. People speculate about my nationality, often making assumptions. Some question why I even attempt to engage with the culture, suggesting I won't understand anything. There are negative sentiments expressed towards foreigners in the local community. I find it surprising when people note that I can use chopsticks or eat spicy food. There are also reactions of disbelief regarding certain foods. Story 16. Not in a meeting but on a hiking trail in Japan, where some people behind me were speaking my native language and talked about something unusual involving goats. They said, "I hope that guy in front of us doesn't understand us. Otherwise, it would be quite embarrassing." I turned my head around with a big smile. Anyway, decent guys, we hiked down together. Story 17. I am a resident in a nursing facility. Many of the staff here are Filipino. When they are assisting me, they often converse among themselves in Tagalog. I am quite fair-skinned. When they finish, I say the only two words of Tagalog that I know, "Salamat pa," which means thank you. The reaction when they suddenly believe I understood the entire conversation is amusing to witness. Story 18. I'm a tall black man, and while in Japan, one day I was wearing my old green hoodie. I walked past a couple of guys who said something like, "He looks like Godzilla." I made a quick roar, sound and mimicked a monster with my hands and kept on walking. Their shocked expressions were hilarious. Story 19. I overheard two Filipino ladies making snide comments about people around them for no reason. Then they brought me up, saying I dressed a certain way because I probably didn't grow up in a God-fearing household. So I went to their table and said, "Could you repeat that?" I didn't hear the part about my clothes in Tagalog. I'm half Chinese, so they didn't think I was Filipino. But they had the nerve to get mad at me for eavesdropping. Either way, they stopped talking about me when I was around. Story 20. In an elevator, I heard a company president lament in Japanese to his subordinates about how bad his diarrhea was that morning. As I got off at my floor, I expressed my sympathies and wished him a speedy recovery. Story 21. I was at the airport and handed my phone to the customs officer. It was an older model, and she laughed at it, saying in Mandarin that she wouldn't even give it to her dog to play with. Then, in English, she told me I could move on. I replied in English that she had my phone. She repeated in English for me to move on, to which I responded in Mandarin, "That's my phone." Her face turned red, and her coworkers laughed. Story 22. My friend was born in South America, but she sounded like a television news reporter. She worked at a place for 10 years, and they never knew she spoke Spanish. The day she quit, she delivered a perfectly spoken 5-minute farewell, leaving them in shock. She said it was satisfying to see those gossipy coworkers get their comeuppance. Story 23. I was on a ship entering a transit strait, and I was the only crew member who spoke the language. I was to accompany the executive officer and harbor pilot to translate. I heard the pilot tell his assistant that he intended to fail the ship and to look out for as many deficiencies as possible. I informed the captain, who sent another crew member to address the issues as they were reported. We continued as scheduled. It turns out that the strait was notorious for sending ships back to the end of the line if they failed inspection. Often, this situation encouraged bribery to regain a favorable position in line and resulted in additional fuel costs for the ship until it was their turn again. Story 24. It wasn't a formal meeting, but we had someone from a different store come in to assist us. My Spanish-speaking coworkers advised me not to let her know I spoke Spanish, so she would criticize me without realizing I understood every word. When I greeted her with my best attempt at, "Hello, how are you?" she responded with, "Very good, dickhead." Story 25. I sound English because I was born and raised in the United Kingdom. My parents were immigrants from Asia, so although I am not fluent in speaking their language, I can understand 90% of it because I am used to hearing it often. In my youth, I worked in a call center, and often when a customer who could not speak English but spoke my parents' language called, they would have a relative with them to translate. I caught several relatives blatantly lying about what our customers had asked them to say in English. Some were trying to defraud them regarding financial products. They were sent straight to the fraud department, and the accounts were locked down. From then on, those customers dealt with us directly using our own interpreters. Story 26. Not me nor a meeting, but it happened to my cousin. For a time, she was a flight attendant, and she and some other Latina colleagues started remarking on how cute a new pilot who was white was in Spanish. He introduced himself in Spanish, adding that he went on a church mission to Paraguay for some time. Story 27. Onsen in Japan. I am a reasonably overweight white woman. There were two preteen girls with their grandmother. Girl 1. Wow, look at the white woman over there. Girl 2. She's really overweight. Grandma. Don't be so rude. Girl 1. She can't understand us. Grandma. It doesn't matter. You shouldn't be so rude. Me. Also, some white people can understand Japanese. The girls suddenly felt so embarrassed they couldn't look at me. Their grandmother made them apologize, but they were all embarrassed and left quickly. Since their grandmother was quick to correct them, even when she thought I had no idea what was being said, I believe they had appropriate adult role models and hope they learned a lesson. Story 28. I am not fluent, but I taught myself a lot of Russian growing up for fun. I was working in construction for my uncle. He preferred to hire immigrants who would work for less money. The area we were in had a large Russian community, so he often employed Russian workers. I overheard two of the workers talking about what a terrible person he was as I walked by on a job. It felt great to agree with them and share my thoughts, reassuring them that my uncle only spoke English and that I was the odd one out. I kind of missed those guys since we spent a lot of time talking about my uncle. Story 29. Slightly off topic to the question, but amusing nonetheless. I am not fully bilingual, but I speak a bit of Spanish. Enough to perform a medical assessment and have some conversation with my patients in the ambulance. I once worked a job where I had two regular partners. Both were Hispanic, and neither spoke a word of Spanish. Working in Florida meant I was serving a significant Spanish-speaking population. Every time we entered a Spanish-speaking home, people would start speaking quickly to my partners, and each time they would point to me. The number of older Puerto Rican men who would immediately say, "The gringo," never stopped being funny to me. Then I would muddle my way through my assessment. Story 30. Okay, not a meeting, but just a casual conversation. I am South African and speak Afrikaans. However, my accent is very British to the average South African ear. I was at my friend's sister's house. She struggles with her weight and is a larger girl. While I was there, the electricians, who are Afrikaans men, were also present. They were speaking in mixed Afrikaans and Zulu, which I know since I studied it as my second language. They were making unkind comments about her weight, saying she is quite heavy and continuously going on about it. It was very mean. It is worth mentioning that my friend's sister is very British but lives in South Africa. She doesn't understand a word of Afrikaans. I didn't say anything to my friend's sister, but as the electricians were leaving, I replied to them in fluent Zulu, and they were astonished. Story 31. I was in a French-Canadian department store installing prototype fixtures when the store manager said to his colleague, "We'll wait until they leave and just take it down. They have no idea what they are doing," referring to myself and their head office planning department. I asked for their feedback in English, and they responded, "We love it. We can't wait to see how it works," followed in French by, "Can't this guy just leave?" I replied in French that I would leave when I was done and would return randomly with pictures to validate the test. It was very quiet for quite some time after that. Story 32. Ah man, I could be here all day, but I'll tell you, Italians don't hold back. The number of times I've had the satisfaction of watching an Italian skin crawl when they realize it. That said, many of them don't care either. This is beautiful. Shop assistant 1. Why did she come in here? Nothing will fit her. Shop assistant 2. Wow. These girls think they can just wear anything. Me, I can't help it. It's the way your dad wants me. Call me mama. Story 33. I speak Japanese as a second language and was working at an izakaya in the Bay Area while in college. I also studied Mandarin and Korean. I have two stories. First, I was dating a Korean guy, and we attended an all-Japanese party in Los Angeles. There was a handsome guy, so in Korean, I told my then-boyfriend that the guy was kind of cute. The handsome guy switched from speaking Japanese to thanking me in Korean. He was half Korean. His mother was from Busan. Oops. 7 years later, while working at the izakaya, many customers were Japanese, Chinese, and Korean. Two Chinese guys were looking at the menu. Our chef was finicky. We couldn't guarantee how long each item would take because he didn't follow a set order. They asked me questions about how long it would take and what the chef had, but we genuinely wouldn't know until the order was placed. I sheepishly apologized for not knowing and for being unable to provide a clear answer. However, one guy became grumpy and said to his friend in Mandarin, "Well, she doesn't know anything. What do you want to drink?" I blinked and responded in Mandarin, "Yeah, what do you want to drink?" The grumpy guy looked embarrassed, and after they ordered a drink, they left. You could hear him muttering curse words in embarrassment. Story 34. I went for a manicure and pedicure, and all the staff were Chinese. I'm of mixed race and learned a bit of Mandarin in secondary school. During the pedicure, I noticed that the beautician was staring at her colleague and they were laughing quietly. Then the colleague asked the beautician, "Are you all right? Are you going to survive?" The beautician replied, "I can't stand dealing with black people's feet. It disgusts me. I need to get this over with as soon as possible." I was really shocked and quite shaky. I got up and said in Mandarin, "If I disgust you, then I'm leaving and of course I won't pay anything." I headed to the door. The shock on their faces was evident. They tried to stop me, saying, "Oh, but there's been a mistake. We weren't talking about you." I was the only black person around. Story 35. Lots of highlights to share. A Mexican woman at work said to her ride, "Wait for me. I have to use the restroom." Caught me off guard. While waiting on a train platform in Thailand, I overheard a woman say to another, "It's okay if he's overweight. He's appealing." I'm still uncertain about that comment. Just to clarify, I'm not really overweight. I'm just larger in a Western sense. Story 36. On the train ride, I sat down opposite two teenage girls. At first, they complained that I had chosen to sit there. Then one of them asked if I understood them, as they spoke one of our official languages, which is only spoken by about 20,000 people. They agreed that they had heard me ask if the seats were taken. After that, they talked about their crushes and their hopes of being intimate soon. I decided to listen to music because I knew I wouldn't be able to keep a straight face. When I left the train, I wished them a nice evening and good luck with their plans in that particular language. Their reaction was priceless. Story 37. I grew up in Asia among many Chinese people and understand a few dialects. Nobody would look at me and guess where I live today. I also have resting face, tattoos, and look like I'm going to chew your head off. But deep down, I'm just a teddy bear. I sometimes supervise graduate student projects for work. One group in particular had a few Chinese students who sometimes communicated among themselves in Chinese. At one point during a meeting, I asked the students if they had any problems with the tasks from last week. One person said quietly in Mandarin, "You should tell him," which received the reply, "No, you tell him." I replied in Mandarin, "Tell me what?" They responded, "You speak Mandarin? Why do you speak Mandarin?" I said in Mandarin, "No, I don't speak Mandarin." Then I asked in English, "What do you have to tell me?" That broke the ice a bit. We had a better working relationship after that. Later, a few asked what it was they had to say. Story 38. I was not in a meeting but on a flight. I spent a few years in Indonesia due to my parents' work, so I speak the language fluently. A couple occupied the window and middle seats, while I was in the aisle seat, which I selected and paid for in advance since I use the restroom often. They asked if I could change seats to the window seat, but I explained that I needed the aisle seat. They then spoke to each other in Bahasa Indonesia, indicating that they would drink a lot of water and frequently use the restroom, potentially inconveniencing me throughout the flight. I laughed quietly and waited for them to follow through with their plan. Unfortunately, they did not act on their intentions. Story 39. Technically, it is my native language, but anyway. I was on vacation and taking public transport. I was on my own at that moment, so nobody knew what languages I spoke. A group of girls, around 18 to 22 years old, got on the bus and immediately started judging everyone in their native language as well as mine. I wished them a nice day in our language when they got off. Story 40. I am an app driver in my spare time. I live in a tourist city in Mexico, which attracts many foreigners. I drove a group of French teenage girls from the city to the beach. During the trip, they were discussing how unattractive I was. I kept quiet. Then I pulled over on the side of the highway and told them that I could understand everything they were saying and asked them to please exit my car. The look on their faces still brings me joy when I remember. Story 41. Not a meeting, but still funny. I am a white man living in South Africa, and I can understand Zulu, which is predominantly spoken by black people in my country. I am also 6 feet 9 inches tall. All I hear throughout my day is equivalent to, "Jesus, this guy is tall." Some people will even shout it to their friends across the room or store, thinking I do not understand. I then respond in a little Zulu, and they realize I understand and feel a bit shy, but we all have a good laugh. I truly love my country and its people. Story 42. Being called a derogatory term by Mexican tile layers in my own home while they were renovating and talking amongst themselves in front of me was quite upsetting. I appear very Caucasian. I told them in perfect Spanish, which I speak fluently, to leave my house immediately, that they were fired, and I did this in front of their supervisor. They did not return. Story 43. Not me personally, but I used to work for Samsung in the UK in the early 2000s. There was a German employee who was fluent in German, English, and Korean. He used to tell me how the Koreans would openly criticize and make fun of the Westerners in Korean in front of them, but would stop once he walked into the room. The German was untouchable because he was technically on secondment to the UK office from Samsung Germany, but the Koreans at the German office had informed the UK office before his arrival that he could speak the language. Story 44. I am a middle-aged white woman living and working in a rural area. I am also fairly fluent in Spanish after years of study and working with immigrants through our church. I worked in asset protection at a large retail store where we caught someone using an old receipt as a shopping list while trying to steal merchandise. We brought them back to the office to start the paperwork, with them sitting on the bench acting confused and shell-shocked. They made a call to their cousin, waiting in the parking lot, and started speaking in Spanish while behaving like a scared child. They informed their accomplice about being caught, which lawyer to call, and which stores to target next. I included everything in the paperwork but did not let them know I understood what they were saying. Some cards should remain close to the vest. Story 45. My friend, who understands French, was on a subway train in New York City across from two girls speaking in French, obviously assuming no one else could understand. One girl was telling an amusing story about herself with a humorous punchline at the end. When she finished, all three of them laughed. An awkward silence followed. Story 46. Many years ago, I overheard some Arabic men talking about how beautiful a woman looked. I recognized the dialect as Syrian, which I could understand since I had been with an Iraqi man who taught me Arabic in both the Baghdad and Mosul dialects, as well as a little Syrian. I'm Dutch, and they clearly did not expect me to understand a single word they spoke. I looked around to see if they meant anyone other than me, and when I realized the nearest woman was far from me, I noticed they were giving stealthy glances in my direction while praising my beauty. I smiled at them and replied in fluent Arabic, thanking them for the compliment, then quickly left with a huge grin on my face before they could recover from their surprised stares. Story 47. As many others have experienced, I have encountered similar situations too many times to count. I speak 7 languages, including Mandarin Chinese. Once, while shopping in China for socks, the man in front of me was buying the same item. The shopkeeper told him, "Don't let her see the change I give you, so I can charge her more." I insisted on paying less. Additionally, I had an experience on a train in Denmark where a group of men speaking French were discussing, quite vividly, what they would like to do to me. Their expressions were priceless when I stood up to get off and said, "Thank you, but you are not my type." In French. Story 48. Not me, my dad. He is the whitest looking man, with white blonde hair and blue eyes, and he has a thick southern accent. He lived most of his life in West San Antonio, where he ran his pharmacy. They had a tradition of not telling new employees that he spoke Spanish. After about a week, or as long as they could hold out, he would just make a comment on something they said, and they would all have a laugh. My mom is also Mexican-American. Most people in the area speak Spanish. It's silly to assume anyone doesn't, and it's a good lesson for interacting with their paler customers. One time, he overheard an employee talking about being beaten by her husband. She had come in with a broken arm. My dad talked to my mom, and they helped get her out and back on her feet. I was little, so I don't remember the details, but they were staying at our place for a while. My mom worked with disabled adults, so she knew how to help her escape safely, how to talk to the police, and what government agencies could offer assistance. She also knew a lot because of her ex-husband, but that's a different long story. Story 49. I speak English natively and a bit of Mandarin. I have been on the train in Singapore a few times and overheard older women talking about me in Mandarin. One time, they were discussing my attractiveness. Another time, they commented on me being overweight and entitled. It was quite a stark contrast between the different groups of women. Each time, I simply thanked them and wished them a nice day in Mandarin afterward. The first group laughed in good humor while the second group was shocked. Story 50. My ex spoke to his friend in their mother tongue, not realizing I understood it due to my knowledge of related languages. He expressed how much he missed his ex and that he still couldn't get over her. I was sitting next to him at the table, and we broke up shortly after. That man was troubling, and his choice to speak in a language he thought I wouldn't understand to discuss another woman was just one of many reasons I should have left sooner. Story 51. I was at a bus stop with 3 teenagers who were speaking Spanish. When I approached, they made fun of me for a moment, then returned to their conversation. The girl asked what time it was, and I answered. The next few minutes while waiting for the bus felt awkward. They stopped talking completely. Story 52. I have lived in rural Mexico for a while now, so I speak some Spanish at this point. As a 6-foot, 250-pound person with long hair, I stand out in the area. I regularly go to the bakery, and the owner knows me and greets me with a big smile when I come in. One day, I walked to the counter, and it was staffed by her 11-year-old daughter, whom I had never met before. She looked up at me, eyes wide, didn't say a word, and started to head to the back in fear. Her mom looked up from the ovens and saw me, then looked at her daughter and said, "It's okay, he speaks Spanish." The girl turned around, still uncertain but ready to give it a try. I looked at her and said, "Yes, of course I speak Spanish." But in loud English. The girl looked at me terrified. Then her mom started laughing, and the girl got the joke. In the end, I got my conquest. Story 53. Not me and not as a meeting. A previous colleague of mine, who is white British, married a Middle Eastern man and knows a bit of Arabic since they lived in Dubai for work. We worked in a grocery store at that time, and she overheard 2 older customers discussing how slow her till was and how she should hurry. My colleague slowed down further, and when she reached them, she greeted them perfectly in Arabic and apologized for being slow. They did not speak for the rest of the transaction. Story 54. Not in a meeting, but in an elevator with my family visiting me in Tokyo. We were speaking French when a group of construction workers, all in their 50s, came in. They listened to us for a bit, and one of them asked his coworkers what language we were speaking. They tried to guess. When we got to the ground floor, I told them in Japanese that we were speaking French. I hope I didn't make them feel too embarrassed. It was just fun to hear their guesses. Story 55. One of my friends is American by birth but has lived in Japan for 20 years. His wife doesn't speak much English. He overhears racist comments. The funniest thing is the reactions of horror and embarrassment as he gently and respectfully encourages Japanese businessmen to be more polite and professional. Story 56. One time when I was in a school board meeting, 2 teachers were talking in Spanish. I don't know much Spanish, just the basics, but I heard them say, "bufanda," which means scarf. I was the only one in the meeting wearing one. Then I heard them say the Spanish word for ugly after scarf. It wasn't a big deal, but my feelings got hurt. Story 57. It wasn't really a meeting, but it was close enough. I'm a white American. I mostly speak English but know a little Spanish. I live in a majority Hispanic area, and while I'm not fluent in Spanish, I know some basic phrases and have been in a few situations where I've had to use it. A while back, I got a new job and was essentially the only white person there. I generally got along with everyone, but there was one person who really didn't like me, though I'm not entirely sure why. One day, I was working on my machine and thought someone had intentionally changed some settings. I won't go into detail, but not only was it inconsiderate, it could have wasted a lot of company money and potentially been dangerous for me to operate the machine with those settings. I overheard the person speaking in Spanish to another individual, essentially saying something like, "We can mess with the gringo. He'll probably never even know." I switched all my settings back right in front of him, turned around, and told him in Spanish, "Vida la mierda way." His face turned bright red, and he looked very embarrassed. Felt like a small victory. That said, I'm sure people still take advantage of me, often due to the language barrier. You win some, you lose some. Story 58. I wasn't in a meeting, but I was in a quiet cafe just outside Melbourne, Australia, with my Belgian wife. A Dutch man was telling his friend about the intimate encounter he had the previous night, sharing many disturbing details that he would not have openly discussed in public. He believed he was safe to speak Dutch in this random cafe on the other side of the world. Never assume that no one speaks your language. Story 59. In a Greek harbor, I was sitting on the dock making watercolor sketches. A tourist and his 7-year-old son approached. The tourist looked over my shoulder and disapproved of what he saw on my pad. He then turned to his son and said in broad Swiss German, "You can do that better, champ." I offered the brush and color set to the boy and said, "Show me." The father's face turned as red as the Port Harbor light. He grabbed his son's hand and turned away, trying to appear occupied with something on the horizon. Story 60. My entire department, along with the same department in other countries of my multinational company, was being outsourced and laid off. The official explanation was that we weren't meeting performance standards and they needed to standardize across countries to improve efficiency and accuracy. We knew this was unreasonable because even the government auditors were consistently impressed by how organized and thorough our records were. Anyway, the head office came to conduct some in-office work related to the outsourcing, and I overheard them say it was a shame our numbers would decline afterward because there was no way they could match our performance. I asked them about it, and it's a good practice to assume that someone can understand you when discussing company matters in the office. Apparently, they had considered outsourcing the departments in other countries to us during their standardization discussions because we had the best numbers, but our services would have been too costly. While this didn't change our situation, it did help us feel better about our work, as they had previously made it seem like it was our fault for underperforming. Story 61. Not me, my dad. My dad was French-Canadian. In a bus in Los Angeles in the 1960s, 2 girls came on, sat down, and proceeded to make fun of my dad's appearance in French. He was a very skinny man with big glasses. They chatted and giggled, and eventually looked up and said in French, "Oh, our stop must be coming up soon. We should pay attention." My dad replied in French, "You passed your stop 10 minutes ago." Story 62. Not me and not a meeting, but my grandma is Lithuanian and grew up speaking Lithuanian. She stopped speaking it when she moved to the United States and learned English. Once, I asked my mom if she had ever heard my grandma speak it since I hadn't, and she said yes, but only once. My mom was in a department store with my grandma, and they were on the elevator with a couple of women speaking Lithuanian. Apparently, my grandma confronted them in Lithuanian because they were commenting on how unattractive her legs looked. She only told my mom that she informed the ladies they were not being very nice, but my mom suspects they were reprimanded. Story 63. I worked in retail during college. I speak fluent German, but I live in Arkansas, which is not known for its German population. I live a few miles from the main Walmart headquarters, so we get visitors from all around the world. There was a couple in line at my retail job complaining about how bad the town smelled in German. When they made it to the register, I was friendly and spoke to them in German. They were not expecting a kid from a small town to speak the language. Story 64. Not mine, but from a friend who worked for a well-known toy company with plants in both the United States and Quebec, Canada. The company sent a U.S. executive to the Quebec location to improve operations. He walked in, took charge, and faced some resistance. He persevered, implemented changes, but noticed many employees were speaking negatively about him in French, not English. Even high-level employees who reported to him spoke in French during meetings. The executive shrugged it off as if it didn't bother him. One reason for his transfer was that he knew French very well, but he never mentioned it to the factory staff. This continued for months. Then, one day, he called a large number of people into a meeting and opened in perfect French. Mouths dropped. He then proceeded to repeat many of the comments he had heard back to the people who made them, addressing them in French to drive the message home. Faces flushed and people fidgeted. He fired a significant number of those present on the spot, and they were escorted out. The managerial cleanup became much faster without the hindrance of backstabbing reports. Story 65. I was walking through Costco, doing some shopping, when a couple passed by, staring at me. They said to each other in Spanish, "I can't believe they let the Walmart shoppers in here now." I wasn't sure whether to respond, as I didn't know if I should be offended or just laugh. I know I'm not the best looking, but that comment stung a bit. Story 66. I have a funny story. I'm a blonde, very pale woman. My dad's nickname for me was Feta, and I don't look Greek at all. My friend and I, from Canada, were on vacation in Hawaii. We were waiting at a corner for the light to change to cross when a family approached. The daughter said, "No one here will understand what we're saying in Greek." And I responded with, "I do." She looked stunned. Then we all laughed and had a nice chat. Story 67. I often get asked to say something in Irish when I'm abroad. Even though I don't speak it well, as the teaching of Irish in schools was severely lacking, I do have a few phrases memorized. Recently, I was caught reciting the Our Father in Irish in front of a group of very non-Catholic individuals by another Irish person. I had passed it off as poetry, and he struggled to contain his laughter. Story 68. I went to school with many Greek kids and learned most of the swear words. I was a diner in Silver Springs, Maryland, and the servers were obviously Greek, using the word malaka frequently. When we paid our bill, I told the cashier that I knew what malaka meant and suggested that the staff keep that to the kitchen. She turned bright red. I know no other Greek words besides the swear words. Story 69. I live in Manitoba with my partner, who is English, and I am French Canadian. I have taught him a lot of French slang over the years. One time, he was looking at birthday cards for me and came across one that said, "To my dear husband." As he was browsing, two guys walked past him, and one called him a derogatory term in Quebec French. It caught him so off guard to hear that in a predominantly English city that he just burst out laughing. The coincidence of someone saying that to the one person who could actually understand was remarkable. Story 70. I am Polish and used to live in the United Kingdom. One time I was on a bus with my date. Next to us sat a Polish tourist family. I immediately recognized that they probably had not traveled much and came from a small town, as they proceeded to harshly criticize everything and everyone around them, frequently using profanity. I did not say a word. After 10 minutes, their stop came, and as they moved to the exit, they left their camera on the seat. Of course, I grabbed it and rushed to them, loudly calling out in Polish, "Excuse me, you left your camera behind." It was a lovely, satisfying sight to see their shock as they fumbled and shrank back while taking it, quietly thanking me before scurrying away. Story 71. I am very white and American. I wanted to learn a language, and since I was heavily into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at the time, I chose Portuguese. After getting pretty good, maybe a year or two later, I was competing in a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competition. Quick relevant side note. There is a phenomenon in competitive Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu called getting Brazilianed. Essentially, if the referee is Brazilian and one of the competitors is, or looks Brazilian, you better submit him because the referee is likely to favor the Brazilian competitor. In the finals of this competition, I overheard my competitor blatantly ask the referee for help in winning. He mentioned that he had an injury to some body part one don't remember and that he wasn't at his best, so he would appreciate it if the referee assisted him. The referee said he would do what he could. So, before the match, while we were shaking hands, I asked the referee in Portuguese, "You were going to call this fair, right?" He did. Story 72. Not a meeting, but the individuals who worked on my bathroom really disliked their supervisor. He violated several labor laws, so I do not blame them. Story 73. A group of men behind me in the receiving line at a wedding reception were making disparaging comments about the bride. They probably thought that someone who was 2 color shades to the left of milk wouldn't know what they were saying. You could hear the sound of their faces hitting the floor when I turned and said they should be careful talking about others because you never know who understands what you are saying. Story 74. My wife is Indonesian, but she hasn't taught me Bahasa. One time when we were visiting her parents and her aunts and female cousins were there, they were talking, so I hopped on my laptop to pass the time. At some point, I didn't know exactly what they were saying, but I knew they were talking about me. I lifted my head and said to them, "I know you're talking about me." Their mouths dropped, and they went bright red. Story 75. People are posting about non-office encounters, so I will share mine. I was a teenager in New England hanging out at a mall when I overheard a group of Hispanic kids saying they should jump me and my friends. I was born in Mexico, but I am very light-skinned. I told them I understood what they were saying, and they just went on their way. Story 76. My stepmother is Cuban, and my dad is Canadian. One year, they went to the Dominican Republic for vacation. The cleaning staff there talked about them the entire time, right in front of them in Spanish. My stepmother held back her feelings until the final day when she confronted them in Spanish. Apparently, as soon as she started speaking, the staff looked as if they had seen a ghost. Story 77. Not a meeting, but my girlfriend and I both speak nearly fluent Mandarin. We went to an upscale Chinese restaurant, and because we are both Hispanic, they were making negative remarks about Hispanics and assuming we probably couldn't afford the food. We didn't say anything until the end, but they were very shocked that we understood what they were saying. Story 78. I do private tutoring as a side gig because I enjoy it. My contact information apparently got around in the deaf community. I don't advertise that I know American Sign Language. I am not proficient enough to feel comfortable offering that service, but I have made an effort and picked up some knowledge over the years. Some of these kids have become too accustomed to having their own secret language, talking in front of others. It's always a little fun to see the flicker of shock when I sign rude at them. Story 79. I was out drinking during a festival when two Mexican men walked by. One, with a giant friendly smile, looked right at me and said, "China su madre," as if it were the nicest compliment ever. My Spanish was decent, so I replied, "My mother's a saint and yours is a whore." They both straightened up quickly, then started laughing so hard they almost fell over. Just like that, we were all best friends. Story 80. I live in a country where 60% of the population speaks Dutch, 35% speaks French, and 5% speaks German. I was waiting in a train station next to a group of German pensioner ladies, presumably tourists, who were standing in a circle discussing why the train was delayed and if the next train would be the right one. After 10 minutes of this, one of the ladies walked up to me and first tried to start the conversation in French. Realizing she couldn't formulate a sentence, she explained her problem in English, which was more or less broken but still understandable. After a few minutes of this, I explained to her in German that the next train wouldn't be the right one. The train they were supposed to take was 10 minutes delayed. I showed her the billboard around the corner where the updated tracking information could be seen and told her I am a linguistics student, so I understood everything they were saying. Her reaction was quite amusing. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.